Hey there everyone, and welcome back to D&D Doge's Emporium of RPG Horror Story Cringe. In today's episode, we have a tale about a new dungeon master wanting to try Dungeons & Dragons after watching Critical Role, a story about what happens when a player goes from GTA to D&D, and much more. So, without further ado, let's get into these stories. DM runs game entirely based on their knowledge of Critical Role. By Reddit user Responsible Ad 7695. Disclaimer: I love Critical Role, though at the time of the story, I did not have a single inkling about who or what they did. Hello all. This will probably end up being a bit of a longer story, and I'll do my best to recount it accurately, as it's been about 2 years now. This is the story of my very first D&D experience. The characters are as follows. Me, a human gunslinger. My partner, a human monk. Friend A, drow rogue. Friend B, elven bard. And DM, the problem. I'll call him Greg. So Greg, a longtime friend of mine, became incredibly infatuated with Critical Role during the pandemic. As someone who had never gotten to tabletop RPGs, I felt very overwhelmed by the sheer volume of content that Critical Role produces, and even more so by Greg, who had turned our usual hangouts into info dumps on the current episode's plotlines. And it didn't end when we weren't hanging out in person either. We'd play video games, and the guy would practically be AFK, talking endlessly about Critical Role and his desire to run a game. Interested in the idea of tabletop RPGs, I convinced my partner to join a game that Greg had finally put together, led to believe, by his seemingly endless stream of information, that he knew what he was doing. I was excited. I did some light research and found Percy from Critical Role to be particularly interesting, and fashioned a human gunslinger with a similar build. Greg brought 2 of our other friends to the table, though they aren't largely important to this. We use standard array or point buy, and settle in for our first game. The game goes as follows. The party comes to town because of an ongoing festival. We all gather at the tavern eventually because of some drinking game, and suddenly, a man bursts through the door, begging for the rescue of his daughter, taken by a herd of goblins. He offers gold, and we take him up on his offer and head into the nearby woods. Here's where it all begins to fall apart. Greg hands me my weapon stats. He had homebrewed my firearms and told me that it was a high-risk, high-reward weapon. My gunslinger's weapon, a small pistol, is incredibly powerful, dealing 2d6 piercing damage with each shot, though its misfire score is an 8. For those of you that don't know anything about guns in 5e, a misfire score, if met, causes your weapon to jam. This is usually reserved for a nat 1, or for more powerful armaments, a 2 or 3. An 8 is astronomical and practically guaranteed to misfire every other round or so. Compound this with the high cost of repair, and one other glaring issue. Admittedly, something I could have caught had I read the player's handbook more in depth. When making attacks, I was explicitly told by Greg that my dexterity did not add to my attack bonus, only my damage. Thus, with a +2 to attack, I was practically guaranteed to either miss or misfire every attack. This made for an unplayable character, overshadowed by all of their party members who could, in fact, add their associated stat bonuses. Fast forward a few sessions later, and friend A and B have dropped out. And now, it's only Greg, my partner, and myself. We enter a town and encounter a particularly charismatic tiefling with all the quirkiness of an e-girl with a secret OnlyFans page dedicated to foot pics. My partner and I ignore said NPC, as both of our characters were rather paranoid, seeing as we'd come to said town looking for a murderous mage. This NPC proceeds to follow us to every location we go, eventually forcing her way into our party as, you guessed it, a DMPC. We eventually find a bookkeeper who offers us information in exchange for our services. We are asked to clear a basement with a curse attached to it. Our level 3 group proceeds to encounter a curse that, unless answered with a high con save, DC 18, it reduces AC, movement, and imposes disadvantages on melee combat. There were several high threat traps, and an encounter we couldn't have possibly survived without the aid of Greg's wonderful DMPC, a Tempest Domain Cleric. Then, a gelatinous cube, challenge rating 2, 4 skeletons, and more traps within said combat room. The monk ends up playing tank, which, if you knew anything about monks, they struggle to do so. With 19 HP to her name, she is quickly dropped to a critical state. I do my best to pump damage in as quickly as I can, which translates to hoping my gun doesn't jam and I spend the rest of the encounter fixing it. But Greg's DMPC, with a huge 37 HP and 20 AC for level 3, goes unscathed and even deals the finishing blow to the cube. This is made worse by the consistent "the cube ignores the tiefling, seeing the dying monk has a larger threat" comments. One short rest later, we venture deeper in to find that, guarding said curse, is a manticore. Manticores have a tail spike attack with a range of 100 feet, of which it can shoot 3, each dealing 1d8 plus 3 piercing damage. Long story short, the encounter, which took place in a 20 by 20 room, involved not a single attack made by yours truly, as I broke my gun, the monk unconscious, and Greg's DMPC being the only acting character inflicting damage to this creature. I ended up surviving with a single HP, having expended all my resources to do so. While there had been difficult encounters before, this one had been unbelievably so, and had it not been for his DMPC never rolling below a 12, we would have TPK'd without any doubt in my mind. Frustrated, I began to look deeper into the player's handbook and the DM's guide. Coming to understand challenge rating, the absolute madness that was my misfire score, and the complete game changer that adding my +3 dex to my rolls would have made, I confronted Greg. Greg replies with something along the lines of, "Matt Mercer always makes his players fight monsters too powerful for them. The struggle is what makes it rewarding." I'm all for a challenge, but there's a difference between an encounter that we can make our way through with smart plays and blessings from the dice gods, and then there's 2 players and a DMPC going up against encounters that could give a full party some trouble. Greg then insisted that it was player error, and had we thought out the encounters more, we could and would have been fine. I disagreed and ended up not playing beyond this point. I would later come to hear from friend A that Greg told him that our characters' choices were boring and unoriginal, and because of that, he'd set out to kill us so we could roll up more interesting ones. Suddenly, everything made sense. I never played with Greg again, and have since become a GM myself, running a year-long campaign for a group of my own, with much more to come. Edit. I had a conversation with my partner, the monk, about this post, and she reminded me that apparently, Greg had loved her backstory, and thus, the two had talked about it. He tried, however, to insert his own ideas into her backstory. When she declined, he seemingly agreed, only for him to later shove the character in anyway, and became upset when she was unreceptive. For context, her character had been isolated as a child, and he tried to, and eventually forced her to, have another character who would be her friend. This character would then approach her in-game, and when she was confused as to who said character was, Greg threw a fit. While I can understand running a DMPC in order to fill out a smaller party, it sounds like the DM in this case just really wanted the character to be a pivotal part of the monk's story, even though she was disinterested in that concept. Then there's the whole deal with making the encounters nearly impossible, only for OP to later find out that the reason the DM did this is because he thought the characters were boring and wanted them to make new ones. Yeah, that is reason enough to not play with that DM anymore. Though I am glad to hear that OP eventually took the DM chair himself and has been having fun, especially since this experience was his first experience with D&D, and that could have soured the hobby for him. Let's move on. When someone goes from playing GTA to D&D, by Reddit user Prismatic Leviathan. So, at the local card shop, we run a one-shot open table game every month. We have rotating DMs, occasional new games, new players. It's overall just a good time. It's where a lot of players in my area got their start, and normally, I'm happy to be a part of it. A few days ago, a new player, who we will call Gary, got a little caught up in bloodlust. Or firelust, to be more accurate. First, he wanted to play someone with a gun. We explained Artificer to him, and how that all works, but he wasn't interested. Then, he said that he wanted to play a class with Fireball, so we helped him build a quick sorcerer, and the game began. It was all about solving a mystery about missing children. It turned out to be harpies that could transform into pigeons, and it would all end with an assault on their lair. Gary heads out to the residential area to check out a spot where multiple kids were taken. A hidden dice roll clicked, and he witnessed a harpy abduct a child. Instead of trying to track it or save the kid, Gary decides to fireball. We quickly explained that that would kill the child, and his response was to smile and say, "I know." Our DM, not wanting to break the immersion, has the kid's mom tackle him in the middle of casting, as bad things happening to children is bad. He then tries to fight the mom, who just happened to be in the city watch. A couple unlucky rolls has him knocked out by the truncheon, and Gary was fuming. We take a break. I talk to him about the game, and he says he gets it now, so we resume play. About 20 minutes later, it's time for the climatic fight. Gary is bailed out and asks where the guard lives, because he says that he wants to recruit her for the assault. Naturally, he deceptions the information out of her CO and heads out. While we're all short resting, he finds the place, and then, after making sure she was inside, fireballs the mom's house. Naturally, we ask him why he did that, and he says, "I'm gonna kill the kid too. You F around and you find out." The DM asks him to leave, which he does, but it definitely soured the rest of the game. We never saw Gary again after that day, but I think the next time we do, he'll probably be in the news. Yeah, I'd say that is pretty much a red flag when a new player wants to join a game, and the first thing they say they want is a gun. Then there's the fact that his following choice was anything with Fireball. It should have been no surprise that that player decided to go all murder hobo. But at least the DM didn't stand it for long, and ultimately gave that player the boot. Let's move on. Our warlock wanted to kill a child thief. By Reddit user, Chibi Yule. So this happened a few days ago. Our group setup was a human warlock, high elf wizard, high elf druid, and my human fighter. The party generally is of the heroic good align type, classic fantasy stuff. We had just arrived in a new town and decided to stroll through the city, take in the view, and go for some shopping. Everything works out for a while. Then an 8-year-old girl, described as ragged and borderline starving, bumps into the druid and attempts to steal a few coins from his purse. We noticed it though, and asked her why she was doing it, with the intent to actually give her more money. The girl almost cried when she told our characters that she was so hungry, and begged for us not to hurt her. Almost all of us agreed that that's fine, but the warlock wanted to cast Eldrich Blast on her. We immediately, in character, argued with her about why a hungry child trying to steal some coins should never warrant a death penalty. But she was stubborn and insisted on attacking her. The DM said that Eldrich Blast would outright kill the girl, but Warlock insisted on going through with it anyway. So, the Warlock cast Eldritch Blast, but our wizard counterspelled, and then we restrained the Warlock. At that moment, the Warlock got really aggressive out of character, and asked us why we'd prefer an NPC kid over her. I, admittedly, was already pretty emotional back then, and almost shouted at her that killing kids is nothing that I signed up for, while she argued, "It's just an NPC, they don't matter." It got pretty heated, but in the end, the DM retconned the whole scene into never having happened. That felt a bit cheap, but okay. I'm just wondering if I overreacted here. Why the hell would someone that is supposed to be playing a good aligned character want to Eldritch Blast a kid just for taking a few coins? Like OP said, the DM described the kid as ragged and starving. Then for the player to react the way she did when the other characters prevented her character from doing it, and then saying that NPCs don't matter in a tabletop RPG, is not only kind of spitting in the DM's face, as they created the world for them to play in, and thus the NPCs, but it's also just not a good attitude for a role player to have. So no, I don't think OP overreacted here. I mean, Warlock was the one to flip out of character first. It just sounds to me that you guys have a murder hobo in the party, and she just doesn't like not being able to murder hobo. Let's move on. But before we do, I have to ask that, if you're enjoying the video, that you drop a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as it does a lot to help the channel grow, and I like watching the little numbers go up. Though, if not, perhaps I can entice you with some cats. But with that said, let's get into today's final story. When the GM is so bad, you wonder if the whole campaign in session is a practical joke. By Reddit user, PKitty. This is a story from years ago, and the names are changed. I'm going to number each red flag because there are a bunch of them. Our group primarily played GURPS and Vampire. Dave, part of our group, had a brother Mark, who I've never met, who wanted to run a D&D game. Some of us had played D&D, but it had been years, so we agreed to give it a shot. Per Mark's instructions, 3rd level, etc., we made characters ahead of time. Flag number 1. We show up at 5 o'clock for the game, and the first thing Mark says is, "Wait, I figured at least one of you would be an anti-Paladin." Well, no. That's kind of a weird thing to assume. My plot doesn't work unless one of you is. Someone changed their character?" No one wants to, but after a long discussion, Ken agrees to trash his old player character and make a new one. This takes him an hour, after which the GM pulls Ken into a side room for a half an hour to go on a solo gaming thing, so the rest of us just play improvised Yahtzee. Ken finally walks out and says, "Guys, I can't say anything, but just know that none of this was my idea, okay?" and proceeds to sit. Red flag number 2. It's 6:45, and Mark proceeds to pull each player back for solo stuff for 15 minutes at a time, or so. After which, each returns disgruntled, and I'm the last player to get pulled back. Mark informs me that I encounter some random bandits. After a few obviously fudged die rolls, I die and end up in hell. But good news, a demon there is willing to resurrect me, as long as I pledge undying servitude to Ken's anti-paladin. I calmly refuse. Mark is shocked. "Wait, you can't refuse." I explained that my character motivation, which he read and approved, is that I stand against any slavery or forced servitude. It's literally all I care about. Though he whines and begs me to just go along with it, or there won't be a game. So I sigh and accept. At this point, it's almost 9 o'clock, and we're all slaves at the yoke of the anti-paladin, and Ken feels terrible about it. Then the game starts. Red flag number 3. As I noted above, none of us knew D&D, and throughout our first encounters, Mark actively used that against us. "Wait, he's being grappled. Can I use my Wand of Lightning on his attacker?" Note that in GURPS, lightning is a single target spell. Mark says yes, and the wizard casts. Then, Mark informs him that his ally got shocked as well. "I said you could cast at the attacker. I didn't say Renor wouldn't be hurt too, hehehe." Red flag number 4. After the lightning incident, the thief decides, in character, that the wizard can't be trusted, so he goes to steal his lightning wand as we all sleep. Out of character, the thief's player makes sure that the wizard's player understands. I just feel like it makes sense in character. "Yeah, it's fine, I get it. None of our characters are friends, so there's going to be tension and drama." Mark doesn't like this, and tells the thief's player, "It doesn't work." No rolls, no nothing, just open fiat. The player asks why, and Mark just repeats that he can't steal it, and that's that. Red flag number 5. Ironically, Dave, who got us all into this, had to work late and didn't get home until almost 10:30, and he was happily surprised that we were still playing. He joins, and Mark has him show up on the road as an encounter. The eagle-eyed among you will notice that he wasn't enslaved like the rest of us. Our party doesn't trust him, so we hold him at knife point as I interrogate him, using psionic mind reading to confirm the truth. Me. What's your name? Dave. Darok Smithson. Me to Mark. Is he being truthful? Mark. No, that's false. Me. Your lies will not avail you here. What is your name? Dave. I told you, it's Darok Smithson. It really is. Mark. Still false. Me, out of character. Dude, stop it. You're gonna make me stab you. Dave, out of character. That's my name. Look. As he proceeds to show us his sheet. We all turn and stare at the GM. Mark. Sure, but that's not his true name. Everyone has a true name in addition to their family name that they go by, and so... At that point, Ken starts silently packing up. The rest of us pick up on his cue and pack up as well. We all just walked out without a word, as Mark asked what was going on and why we were leaving, before ending with, Okay, well, call me so we can set up a time for the next session. As we all went home and never returned to this game. Yeah, leaving was probably for the best at that point. Though they should have told the DM why, so that they could possibly improve and not make those same mistakes in the future. Just the fact that the DM wanted one of the players to change into an anti-Paladin, or else the game wouldn't work, is the first sign that the DM basically wanted to write a book and just have the players play predetermined roles, especially with pulling each player aside to essentially make them attached, unwillingly, to Ken's anti-Paladin. I understand that some railroading is required at the beginning of a campaign just to get the ball rolling, but this is just taking away player agency way down to the character creation level. Hopefully, that DM eventually realized this and changed for the better. But that will do it for today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.